This is showing all our ventricles. So in the area of the diencephalon, so you notice this brown structure here. This connects all the way across the two hemispheres, the two sides of the brain. So we have this model, it would fit in just like so. So that space here, the cavity, this is the third ventricle. And we see a connection from lateral ventricle connecting to third. So this skinny area here, the part that broke, that was the interventricular foramen. So it's connecting the lateral ventricle onto the third, just this little narrow canal here in the brain. So also part of the diencephalon, the third ventricle, and connected to it, the interventricular foramen. And here we can see just the area. This would be the space, the cavity, the third ventricle. But the structure that we're touching is the thalamus. The cavity, this area is the third ventricle. So there is the mesencephalon. So we're looking now this area, the neck on the seahorse. And so now on the anterior portion, so this area here, the anterior part in the mesencephalon, is the cerebral peduncles. And the posterior region, this is the corpora quadrigemina here.
Corpora quadrigemina. That's fun to say.
It means the four bodies. So like two twins would be four bodies. Two sets of twins, four bodies. So that's this area here. The anterior part, cerebral peduncles, and the posterior part, the corpora quadrigemina, is this portion here. And the space between it, part of the ventricles, so this narrow space, that's the cerebral aqueduct. And that's what we're seeing here. Coming down from the third ventricle, this narrow canal, this is the cerebral aqueduct. So next there's a metencephalon, and has these two areas here. So there's pons, so this anterior part here, the bulge, is the pons. And the posterior portion, this is all cerebellum. So we put it together here, this is the cerebellum, this whole region of the brain. And when we have it together, the medial portion of the cerebellum, so where you see the bulge, and it goes all the way around. The medial area, this is called the vermis on the cerebellum. It's just that medial bulging segment, the vermis. And we split it in half. There's now cerebellar hemispheres, the two halves, the cerebellar hemispheres.
What's the function of that?
This major function is to maintain our balance. So when we put it back in place, we're seeing a cerebellar hemisphere, just half of the structure. And there's the surface. So the surface of the cerebellum, that's the cerebellar cortex. Cortex is always the superficial part. And here, the deeper area, the white structure, it would represent white matter, the deeper portion. The branching white matter is called the arbor vitae. So white matter deeper in the cerebellum.
Arbor vitae? Vitae.
And so it's these two areas, the cerebellum, the pons makes up the metencephalon. And now the myelencephalon, we just have two areas to point out. So there's another space here. You notice this space. And if we travel down the cerebral aqueduct to this space, the cerebral aqueduct leads to the fourth ventricle here. The fourth ventricle. And the structure here now is the medulla oblongata. And this medulla oblongata is just going to lead now right into the spinal cord. So that's where this brain model is stopping, right here at the medulla oblongata.
It's the whole surface.
Yeah, all of this area here. So the only structure in the myelencephalon, the medulla oblongata. And then, of course, at the top, so everything where we have the telencephalon. So that's at the beginning of the list. We have the whole telencephalon. And the bulges all around, gyri. The very narrow grooves or sulci anywhere.
Is this the central or what was it?
Central sulcus.
Is that it?
The central sulcus. On the side, there's the lateral sulcus. And just looking at the lobes, so a frontal lobe goes all the way up to the central sulcus. Posterior to that, parietal lobe. We get to the back, occipital lobe. Point out the lateral sulcus again, and inferior to it, the temporal lobe. The fissures separating the two cerebral hemispheres. Much wider separation. That's a longitudinal fissure. And superior to the cerebellum, if you put that back in place, superior to the cerebellum, there's a transverse fissure.
Could you tell how smart this person was if they had these folds in their brain?
No.
Or is it just kind of...
Yeah, the shape of the brain has nothing to do with the function or the size.
Right, but would this, like, all these folds, would that be considered like a smart person or an average smart person? Or a...
No, this would just be a typical human brain with these foldings here. Yeah, so the shape and the size doesn't have anything to deal with the function.
Unless you have a smooth surface.
Can you show me the hindbrain and the forebrain?
Hindbrain? Oh. Here we'll just point out the olfactory bulb. So the olfactory bulb.
So it's not the whole thing?
Yeah, it's not the whole thing, just the end.
The two ends.
Two ends there. And if we really take it apart, we can see just that dark surface, the cerebral cortex. So it's all around the surface, but it's just a very thin superficial surface, cerebral cortex. And we turn it to the side here, this medial view, the arch all across here. So the corpus callosum, this arch across here. And we can see part of the space, like when I take it apart, here's this area here, this space. This would just be that segment here. And there's the entire area, the longitudinal fissure. It would kind of fit, if you notice, right in this region. So this is how this curves around, and of course it's now embedded inside the brain. So we have a lateral ventricle here, and here's the second lateral ventricle. So these spaces, the lateral ventricles. And I think that's everything we need for that section, right?
Yeah.
So we have the model and we have the poster as well.